evening. How many of you are excited to be here this evening? I'm really excited too. My name is Kara Lyons, and I am proud to say that I am a public school educator. I teach 7th grade English language arts in White Plains. It is an honor to welcome you all here this evening on behalf of our NYSUT locals. Tonight is all right, NYSUT locals. Tonight is very exciting. We have so much collective, professional expertise in this room this evening. Whoa. Despite what anyone might say. We know what all kids need. This evening, we're going to hear from one of the great champions of public education, Diane Ravitch. Then we will hear from a panel of stakeholders on the issues of testing and funding. But first, I'd like to introduce someone very special who fights for what all kids need tirelessly every single day. In fact, she was out visiting classrooms today, including mine. It is an honor to introduce NYSUT President Karen McGee.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Westchester. It's really good to be home tonight. So, wow, what a great turnout, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces and so many folks who have stood to my left and to my right and fought with me for the future of public education. I'd be remiss if we didn't thank SUNY for allowing us to use this great facility tonight. It's a beautiful campus. Thank you, SUNY. For those of you who may not know, SUNY is a public university, one of the best in the nation. So as we band together and fight for the future of public education, we must remember that the fight is not a K-12 fight. It's a fight that includes pre-K, and it includes our brothers and sisters from SUNY, CUNY, and the community colleges. So let's just keep that in mind as we move forward. They're a terrific network for all of us. So as Kara said, I did spend the day visiting public schools in Westchester County. I need to say that just a little louder because I hear that my voice may not resonate all the way to Cuba right now, so that the governor knows what I did. But I did spend my day visiting some great public schools in Westchester County. And I want to thank the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the superintendents, the principals and the school boards, and the rank and file members that afforded me the opportunity today to see what goes on in our schools every day, to get back into the classroom, and to continue to send forward that message that public schools in New York State are working. Just come visit them, Mr. Governor. So I did start the day visiting Kara's classroom in White Plains Middle School, and the enthusiasm that she represented tonight is the enthusiasm that she does bring into her classroom. And they work with the Great Books program, and just to see like the level of engagement, the questioning techniques, to watch students in her room go to 4 different corners, depending upon where they stood on an issue. And the thing I really appreciated seeing that they could respect various opinions different than their own. They could defend those positions, and they could do it civilly. So I'm going to ask her tonight if she can burn me a CD of that, and I'll take it back to Albany and see maybe if we can share that out with a few people. No one in particular, of course. What we do, we love every day. I saw that in Valhalla today. I was in a freshman high school English class, Joe Ferrara, member of the Valhalla Teachers Association. And what the students did in that room, he breaks them up into groups, he differentiates how he engages them in the writing process in their classroom, and how they decide on the topics that they're going to work on, and how they're going to defend the positions of the type of papers they're going to write. But the thing that I was able to witness today is he posed the question, what skill do you think would be most valuable as you go through life? And we had students sitting there just contemplating this, and others writing feverishly as they heard everybody else's answers. And of course, I got pigeonholed before I left as to what do you think is the most important thing. For those of you who know me, I would say it's the ability to think critically, because I believe once you can do that, you can weave in humor, any other defense mechanism, any other presentation skill you need to learn. But if you can't think critically and you can't see outside your own opinion, it's a dangerous place. And when I went to walk out, Joe said, you see that magnet on the back that says Think 360? You just summarized my whole course for me. I was like, great, you keep teaching, I'll keep fighting. Let's go on. But the fact that he was challenging each of the students in that room, and the engagement I saw in White Plains and Valhalla was mirrored as the rest of the tour took place today. So I moved on, and I was able to go to Hastings today. And today's a day of solidarity in many of our districts, so I had teachers wearing all of their union attire, and activities in particular in Hastings took place around the threads that run through the labor movement, from kindergarten up through the higher grade levels. And I was able to read the book Swimmy to a group of kindergarten students. Now, I started my career as a kindergarten teacher. So here And I'm proud to say in the Harrison Central School District, I may say that too, and I stayed there for 30 years, and go Harrison. Hi, Joan. Hi, Rachel. Those are board members from Harrison, for the record. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. So I watch the eyes of these little kindergarten students. You know, they look at you like, wow, you're big, and you're an adult. And as I'm reading, I'm posing questions to them. What do you think will happen to the blackfish next? Why do you think that happened? And at the end, what do you think is really what's going on in this book? Because if you don't know the story, all of the red fish are consumed by this one evil person, if you will, this one evil fish, and eventually the blackfish goes out and finds new people, and they band together, and they're stronger to fight off their enemies. And basically, isn't that one of the tenets of a union? That we come together to work to strengthen and to fight back on the things that we need to fight for. That's what I see here tonight. I see parents, I see teachers, school board, superintendents, school-related personnel, teachers, everybody coming together for the same, members of the Board of Regents, coming together to ensure that we all fight for the same reason, the future of public education. I went on to an upper grade, which was a bilingual type of class where, it's not really called bilingual, I forgot the term you used, but they tested my ability to use any words in Spanish and speak, and it's not there. I took French, and the French Regents really productive for me. But I read the story of Cesar Chavez, and how he formed a union, and the purpose of that union, and how when everyone banded together and marched together and moved together, they were able to affect change. So it was a really impressive day to see our schools promoting not only the tenets of unionism, but what's important in a democracy. So I saw that in the Hastings School. And then I was able to move on, and I stopped, and I saw one of my mentors, Sister Palaio, and I was able to go through the Yonkers schools today. And I was able to see some really impressive programs there. The principal took me through the school, Michael Shapiro. We toured the school. We saw a program that's done in collaboration with Purchase College. And we saw how we teach literacy through the arts. Amazing program, the action and the activity that took place in that classroom. I left today after meeting with principals, meeting with the superintendent, Dr. Myers, meeting with Principal John Thomas, meeting with teachers and parents and students. I left today knowing what I knew when I walked through the door, but feeling far more confident. The public schools in New York State are working. We need to get that message out. I ran into all of these really great, important people who impact what happens every single day. The one person I did not have the opportunity to run into, and I mean, by run into, I mean, shake hands and say hello. I don't want anybody tweeting anything out other than that. I did not run into the governor. Governor Cuomo is a no-show. He continues not to attend the forums that are being held throughout this entire state. I've been to the North Country, I've been to Buffalo, I've been to Cooperstown, I've been to Long Island, I've been to New York City, I'm in Westchester. We have 60 forums taking place in the month of March. The governor has yet to commit or show up to any one of those forums. The purpose of those forums, you can boo him if you like, the purpose of those forums is to engage the governor in conversation about what all kids need, regardless of zip code, regardless of their ability to advocate for themselves. That's the purpose of these forums. It's to call out the governor and say, what are you thinking? You've come up with a budget proposal that ties 50% of a teacher's rating to test scores? Come here. We're going to listen to an expert in our field tonight. We're going to listen to many experts in the field tonight in our panel, as well as our guest speaker. Come and listen to our boards of education. Come and listen to our superintendents and our teachers and our parents. Come and listen to our students. What you're putting forward is wrong for education. Holding the aid of our school districts hostage stops every parent and community member from being a part of the democratic process to weigh in on what they want to see in their school district and how they want their money spent. And last I checked, this was still a democratic nation. This anti-public education agenda would decimate our schools and our universities. It would close down opportunities for our children, all of our children. His my way or the highway type of mentality, holding our Senate and Assembly members hostage, is not acceptable. He's looking already, he's holding money from K to 12 and higher ed in excess of $1 billion. This is our money. This is taxpayer dollars. I was at a forum 2 weekends ago where an assemblywoman said, "We did not elect a king last time I checked." Ladies and gentlemen, we did not elect a king. Now let me be crystal clear, because there is one point that the governor is touting throughout New York State. Quote unquote, the president of the teachers union would not in any way, shape, or form accept an evaluation model for teachers. How many of you in this room know me? How many of you understand the value of an evaluation that's fair and objective and fosters professional dialogue amongst people in our profession? So teachers have always been evaluated. We're not afraid to be evaluated. But evaluation doesn't mean 50% of a score that's generated and another 20 that comes out of a black box somewhere that no one can define is an appropriate, fair, and objective way to evaluate teachers. So the evaluation has to be something whose end result is to ensure that it helps teachers hone their craft and helps students perform better. That's the end result. And what that performance is to be determined, because a test does not equate to performance in any way, shape, or form. So That's all the bad news, so I have a little bit of good news. There's been some good news this week, and that's for a change coming out of Albany, but the Assembly has just proposed an education budget that clearly reflects a real understanding of public education. And it addresses at this point in time just the financial needs of the districts. So the Assembly has done that. The Senate, I am certain, will move to a good place. They're not quite there yet. And I'm certain that they will find their way, because what this governor has put forward is not going to stand with the taxpayers of the state of New York. So let's flip back to the second part of FDR's New Deal, 1936, right? He says, we have only begun to fight. And when he says that, it was interesting as I look back and I was reading some of the excerpts from his speech. What he meant by that was we've only begun to fight on a lot of social issues, but what jumped out at me was the community issue, and next to it was the term education. So I think it's apt to use that this evening because FDR in 1936 saw the relevance of education and of public education and public programs that supported our communities and ensured we had a good quality of life. So I thank you for being here tonight. I thank you for taking a stand for what all kids need. I thank you for standing against an agenda that serves the interest of billionaires and privateers. And I'll leave you with a couple of things. All kids need. Okay, that's the theme, what kids need. Well, all kids need public universities. All kids need teachers who challenge them and push their thinking. All kids need respect for themselves and others. All kids need an excitement for learning that should never be extinguished. All kids need the time to read, to think, to share, to play, to learn how to share a toy. All kids need to see the value and strength of working together as well as working on their own. All kids need, and that includes every one of us in this room, leaders who are accountable for their actions and make students and the decisions that impact them based on facts and not the settling of political scores. All kids need advocates, like those of us who are in this room this evening. And all kids need great teachers. And I am confident that New York has great teachers. So it's up to us to collectively steer the conversation to the right direction and make the changes necessary to preserve public education and the democracy that we hold so near and dear. I thank you again for your engagement. I thank you for in advance for staying engaged in this fight, and I am confident that in the end we will prevail. Thank you.
To thank you, Karen McGee, on behalf of everyone here for the hours and the time and your life that you commit to this work. Thank you so much. Speaking of people who spend a lot of time fighting for public education, it is an honor and a privilege to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. How many of you are excited? I have a list of accomplishments, but I would just like to say it is my honor to introduce my personal hero, Diane Ravitch.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My greatest accomplishment is that I'm able to walk across the stage. Because those of you who follow my blog, and I hope you all do, if you have time, You know that last spring, I fell and had a horrible rehabilitation. Didn't think I was ever going to walk again. I'm walking. So I want to echo something that Karen said, and that is, we will win. And you know, you've read the stories and the reports in the newspaper. We're up against billionaires. We're up against the Koch brothers. We're up against foundations that run by billionaires who are pouring money into non-union schools and activities. They want to defeat you because you're the biggest thing standing between them and privatization. And the reason we'll win is because everything that they propose has failed. Wherever I look at the evidence, charter schools underperform public schools, even though they cherry-pick the students. Voucher schools fail. And wherever they're tried, whether it's Milwaukee or DC or Cleveland, the kids are not getting a better education. And in many states that have recently adopted vouchers, the vouchers are going to religious schools that teach creationism, that have no curriculum, that have uncertified teachers, and no one can persuade me that that is an improvement in education. That's ridiculous. So let me say, because I've talked a couple of times recently in Westchester County, and you may have, if you follow Twitter, have seen a picture of me on a wonderful beach about a month ago. And I was on a wonderful beach, and you'll see, if you look closely, it says Bedford Teachers Association on my T-shirt. Well, Westchester County, as you well know, has some of the best schools in New York State. It also has some of the best schools in the nation. Wherever there are low-performing schools, they are located in poor communities. And what should Governor Cuomo and the regions do? They should celebrate your successes, and they should bring extra support to the schools that need help. Instead, the governor wants to impose a harsh and punitive evaluation scheme on all public school teachers, including those that are already successful. He wants to open more privately managed charters, and instead of helping low-performing schools, he wants to close them and hand them over to entrepreneurs. He wants tax credits. No one even talks about this. Tax credits are another form of vouchers so that parents can use public tax money to send their children to religious schools. We don't do that in New York State. We shouldn't do it in America. I think people have a perfect right to send their children to religious schools, and they should pay for it. So none of what the governor is proposing is wise public policy. None of it has a shred of evidence behind it. It's a grab bag of policies that have failed and failed and failed again. Good schools succeed not only because of the dedication of fine educators, but because they have community support, the support of parents and communities. Unfortunately, Governor Cuomo thinks that you in Westchester and teachers and in communities across the state are hiding a lot of bad teachers. The irony is he created the current evaluation system, he and Commissioner King, and now he's angry that only 1% of teachers statewide were found to be ineffective. He says, you're hiding them, they must be there. They must be there. He thinks that if students fail, then their teachers must be bad teachers. He says it's time for real accountability. He's arguing, of course, against his own plan. But consider this, when Andrew Cuomo became governor in 2010, 53% of students were proficient in English language arts on the state test. Now only 31% are. 61% were proficient in math, but now only 36% are. Why did the scores collapse since he became governor? Is it because he's a bad governor? Or should we hold the regents responsible? Shouldn't someone be held accountable for the collapse of the scores? So, well, what's really going on here? First of all, the governor is angry because NYSUT didn't endorse him in his campaign last year, he wants to terrorize and demoralize every teacher in the state, even if it harms public education and harms students. He has forgotten that he was supposed to be the students' lobbyist. In fact, he did not deserve NYSUT's endorsement. Just a year ago, at a rally in Albany called by the charter schools, he declared himself the lobbyist for the charter schools, which enroll only 3% of the students in the state. He's not the lobbyist for your students, just for those students, because those students are backed by people who gave him millions of dollars for his campaign. Second, the governor has this crazy idea that if students don't pass absurdly hard tests, it must be their teacher's fault. And third, he has said that he will withhold funding for the students unless you adopt his plan for evaluating teachers. Basically, he's holding the children hostage to make you comply. And fourth, and I think this is very important, the governor actually knows nothing about teacher evaluation. He knows nothing about the research that shows that his idea is wrong. He's certainly never evaluated a teacher himself, so why is he telling everyone else how to do it? What I want to do tonight is talk about his plan and why you must forcefully resist it. When New York State won $700 million in Race to the Top funding, the state agreed to base 20% of every teacher's evaluation on test scores. This, by the way, was Secretary of Education Arne Duncan's big idea. No other nation evaluates its teachers by the test scores of their students. Cuomo now wants to increase the weight of student test scores to 50%, and that's wrong. It was a huge mistake to agree to include test scores in teacher evaluation because only about 30% of teachers teach the tested subjects. The only students with annual test scores are those who teach reading and math in grades 3 through 8. Using the current tests, there is no way to use the scores to evaluate the teachers of the arts, physical education, science, history, and other subjects. There is no way to evaluate teachers of K through 2 or teachers in high school because they don't teach the tested subjects. So what could states do, what could this state do to carry out the promise that it made in accepting Race to the Top money? Well, it might spend hundreds of millions of dollars to develop 50 or more tests for every subject and for every grade. It might then demand that 1 or 2 months of every school year be devoted entirely to testing, not to instruction. Some states have actually tried to do that. Now, I learn about these things on my blog. I get these amazing comments from teachers all over the country. In Massachusetts, they're now using something called FitnessGram for physical education teachers. Students need to show improvement in their body mass index. Physical education teachers will also be judged by the number of sit-ups their students can do and the time it takes them to run a mile. In Ohio, the Department of Education has been mandated by state law to put together a 165-page physical education evaluation system that is now being used across the state to measure the effectiveness of PE teachers. The document not only spells out the standards students are to meet in gym class, but it also has a number of written items for students to pass. Now, here are some items for K through 2 students. Remember, these are children 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. It includes questions like, to throw a ball overhand with your right hand, you should step forward with your left foot. Is this true or false? Of course, first comes the question of can they read? And as one of the readers on the blog said, gee, when I go out to play golf or tennis, the first thing I think of is where does my foot go first? No, if you do that, you'll fall down. So the reader from Ohio who sent me the information about the new Ohio PE standards said, as the closing quote, they are out of their minds. So New York might do, instead of having a test for every subject in every grade, it might do what other states have done, such as Florida, and that is to evaluate teachers based on the scores of students they never taught. Thus, the art teacher might be evaluated by the reading scores of the school. The physical education teacher might be evaluated by the math scores. This is called shared attribution, and this is totally loony. In fact, teachers in Florida went to court and sued and said it was unfair, and the judge ruled, it may be unfair, but it's not unconstitutional. There will be more court cases. There's one right now in New York State involving a teacher in Long Island. But there's another reason why it's absurd to judge teachers by the test scores of their students. It doesn't work even when they do teach the tested subjects. Students are not randomly assigned. A teacher may have a dream class one year, a difficult class the next year. She may get a high rating the first year and a low rating the next year. She may get a high rating in teaching reading and a low rating in teaching math, making her eligible both for a bonus and for being fired all at the same time. If you ask me what percentage of your evaluation should be based on student test scores, I would say it should be 0%. Now, since Arne Duncan dangled nearly $5 billion before the states in 2009 and persuaded most of them to do this, to judge teachers by the test scores, this approach has worked nowhere. Houston fired its teacher of the year. The scores are unstable. Those who teach students with disabilities and those who teach English language learners get low ratings. Those who teach gifted students do not see big score increases because their students are already at the top. And they get low ratings. In the public school that my grandson attends in Brooklyn, a teacher of a gifted class had an entering group of students whose average was 3.92, and the computer projected that they should leave her class with an average of 3.97, but they only reached 3.95. So based on 2/100ths of a point, she was rated one of the city's lowest performing teachers, even though her principal said she's an excellent teacher. And in fact, teachers are being rated based not on their quality as teachers, their ability to engage students, to excite students, and to give great lessons, but on which students they teach. The experts say that it's wrong to judge individual teachers by their student test scores. The American Statistical Association warned against using this method, which, as you know, is called VAM, or value-added measurement. The American Statistical Association said that teachers account for 1 to 14% of the variance in test scores. Many other factors, especially family income and home life, are far more important. The test scores are, in fact, could be called the Family Wealth Index. This is true, by the way, of every test, every standardized test in the world, whether it's the SAT, the ACT, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, any test score you want to name, the kids at the top come from high-income families, the kids at the bottom come from low-income families. Sometimes you find poor kids who make it to the top. Sometimes you find rich kids who are really dumb and they're at the bottom. But look at those SAT scores, family income. With each increment in family income, up or down, the scores go up or down. It's a very tight correlation. The National Academy of Education and the American Educational Research Association issued a joint statement opposing the use of VAM for evaluating individual teachers. Like the American Statistical Association, they said there are many other factors that influence test scores, including student health, student motivation, family support, peer culture, the work of other teachers in the school, the teachers that the student had the previous years, the school curriculum, the school leadership, it goes on and on. And you know what? There are actually, Arnie Duncan doesn't know this, neither does Governor Cuomo, there actually are some students who don't do the reading or the homework. There are some, and their teacher will be called ineffective and punished because they didn't do their reading or their homework. So states and districts have spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to create a test-based evaluation system, maybe billions of dollars by now. It doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere. And worst of all, it puts far too much emphasis on standardized testing. The $700 million that New York won as part of the race to the top has probably cost the state multiple times $700 million. Wasted on testing, test prep, hardware, software, bandwidth. Some districts received less than $100,000 in funding and then spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to comply with the mandates. Between George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind and Barack Obama's race to the top, standardized tests have become far more important than they deserve to be. They've become the focus of schooling. Our nation is wasting literally billions of dollars on testing, and this is great for Pearson and great for McGraw-Hill. It's not so great for students. These tests are used to label children as failing or as a 1, 2, 3, or 4. They determine whether teachers are supposedly effective or ineffective. They determine whether public schools will be closed and turned into privately managed charters. Our public school students may be the most over-tested students in the world. Among the 10 highest performing nations of the world, not one of them tests students every year. Finland, Hong Kong, and Taiwan have no standardized compulsory exams in primary school. That's up through 6th grade. Singapore, Poland, Estonia, and China have only one exam at the end of 6th grade. Korea and Japan give a diagnostic national test in 6th grade. No test before 6th grade. We're the only one that tests 3rd graders, 4th graders, and 5th graders every year. Canada tests students in grades 3 and 6 in reading, writing, and math. In secondary school, Finland gives no compulsory exams, and the others mainly have graduation exams. None of these high-performing nations do what we do and test all children from grades 3 through 8, and they're happy. The switch to the Common Core standards and the Common Core test have ratcheted up the pressure on students, teachers, and principals. Now, why did New York adopt the Common Core standards? Because the Obama administration required states to adopt college and career-ready standards, even though they were not yet finished, to be eligible to compete for that $5 billion in Race to the Top. And many states adopted them sight unseen. The Texas State Commissioner refused to endorse them because he said he wanted to read them. Funny idea, wasn't it? But New York and 44 other states wanted to compete for the money, and we endorsed them. The Common Core standards were never field tested. We have no idea whether they will increase achievement gaps or narrow them. What we do know is that the writing of the Common Core standards violated every rule developed by the American National Standards Institute for creating national standards in every part of American life. The ANSI, American National Standards Institute, has set criteria for standard setting. And they say that standard setting should be transparent and open. It should include all relevant stakeholders. It should be impartial, not dominated by a single group or individual. And it should have an appeals process to resolve complaints. The Common Core writing process was not transparent. It did not include all relevant stakeholders. It was dominated by the Gates Foundation, which paid $200 million for everything, and then hundreds of millions more to pay for advocacy groups to go around the country and testify about how great the standards were, even though they had never been tried anywhere. It did not include different and well-informed perspectives. The writing group did not fairly represent all stakeholders. It was dominated by inside the Beltway groups, like the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Governors Association, and a group called Achieve, which is devoted to high-stakes testing. David Coleman of Student Achievement Partners, formerly of McKinsey, currently the CEO of the College Board, was chosen as the chief architect. The standards were rolled out as a fait accompli. There was no process to make revisions or to listen to appeals. More than 500 experts in early childhood education signed a letter saying that the Common Core standards are developmentally inappropriate for young children. For example, they require that all children learn to read before they leave kindergarten, but children develop differently, and there is a wide spectrum of normal development. It doesn't matter if a child learns to read before kindergarten, during kindergarten, in first grade, or even in second grade. By the time they grow up, no one remembers except their parents when they learn to read. The standards recommend a strategy called close reading, which means reading the text without any context. Reading the Gettysburg Address while knowing nothing whatever about the Civil War or who Abraham Lincoln was. Reading Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham City Jail without knowing anything about Dr. King or about the Civil Rights Movement. I call this nonsense. The Common Core standards say that reading should be divided 50-50 between fiction and nonfiction in the early grades and divided 70-30 in favor of nonfiction in high school. Now, what's the reason for this division? It's because the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the federal testing program, and I served on its board for 7 years, it's called NAEP. NAEP gives those instructions to testing companies to develop the assessments. But they're not saying how teachers should teach. They're simply saying when you're writing the test, this is the appropriate division for your questions. The fact is that both fiction and nonfiction are very valuable. I write nonfiction. I like nonfiction. I also like fiction. No other nation that I know of sets an arbitrary percentage for deciding when to teach one or the other. This is a decision that should be left to English teachers. And I understand that people defending the standards say, well, we're not just talking about the English class, we're talking about the whole curriculum. Well, I don't know of any math class that teaches fiction, nor any science class. So you're really, when you boil it down, you're really talking about instructions to the English teachers. And I think it's wrong. The tests of the Common Core are even more problematic than the standards themselves. Arne Duncan awarded $360 million to two groups to develop tests for the Common Core standards. One is called PARC, the Partnership for Readiness for Colleges and Careers. Some people pronounce PARCC the other way, backwards. The other one is called the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Now, Pearson has the contract to develop PARC, and New York is part of the PARC group, but New York has used its own version of the Common Core test prepared by Pearson for the past 2 years, and who knows if they'll be using PARC or just Pearson that's not PARC. It's sort of hard to tell at this point. The test results, as you know, have been shocking and abysmal. Only 30% of students across the state reached proficiency in English language arts. 70% allegedly failed to reach proficient. Only 3% of English language learners, 5% of students with disabilities, less than 20% of African American and Hispanic children reach proficient on the New York State test. Teachers said that the tests were in most instances 2 grade levels above the student's actual grade. 5th graders were taking tests written for 7th graders, 6th graders were taking tests appropriate for 8th graders. Former Commissioner John King predicted in advance that 70% of the students in the state would fail the test. He said this before the test was given. How did he know? He knew because he set the cut score, he set the passing mark. He arranged it that 70% would fail. Now, what I learned when I was serving on the NAEP governing board was that every test question is field tested, and every test question comes with numbers that say this is what percent of kids will get it, the right answer, and this is the percent that will fail. So when they're putting the test together, they can either put in lots of hard questions and make it a very difficult test, or they can put in lots of easy questions, or they can balance them. They can do and make a normal curve. They can get any outcome they want, and that's decided by the policymakers. So Russ Walsh, who is a literacy expert and who blogs about reading, subjected the PARCC test to readability tests, and he concluded that all but one of the most frequently used measures of readability showed the tests were, in fact, 2 grade levels higher than they should be. Stephen Rasmussen, who's a publisher of math textbooks for the past 40 years, reviewed the other federal test, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and he said the math was so fatally flawed that the test should not be used at all. Yeah. Why do so many children fail these tests, aside from the fact that they're designed to fail them? Both of the testing consortia decided that they would adopt the same scoring as the federal test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. As I said, I was on the NAEP governing board, and I know how the scoring works. The highest level, which is advanced, is like getting an A++. That's reached by no more than 5 to 10% of all students. The next highest level, proficient, is solid academic achievement. I considered it to be like an A or an A-. And below that was basic, which would be like a B or a C. And really poor achievement was below basic. So the 2 consortia decided that they would use NAEP proficient, an A or A-, as the definition of proficient. And anyone who did not reach an A or A- was a failure. How would that work in your school? Not so well. You'd be failing most of the kids all the time, of course. Now understand that on the NAEP, only one state in the nation, Massachusetts, has ever had as many as 50% of its students score proficient on the NAEP. The testing groups knowingly chose a passing mark that was out of reach of the majority of students. They knew well in advance that only 30 to 35% of students in most states have ever scored proficient by NAEP standards. The Common Core tests are, in fact, designed to fail the majority of students. That's exactly what happened in New York. But you need to understand that the passing marks, the cut scores, are not based on science. They are not objectively created. They're based on subjective judgments of human beings, people like you and me. The difference between basic and proficient is not determined by something as a thermometer or a barometer or a yardstick. It's arbitrary. The cut score can be shifted up or down depending on what result those in charge want. If they want a large percentage of students to pass, they lower the cut score. If they want a high percentage to fail, they raise the cut score. And parents are none the wiser. State officials will tell you that the scores will get better over time. That's what they're saying, and maybe they will and maybe they won't. NAEP has been using these achievement levels since 1992, and a majority of students still have not reached NAEP proficient. Do you think students will be encouraged to try harder if they fail the state test year after year? Do you think that 3rd grade students will love school after they learn that they failed? No, I don't think so. If those tests are used for promotion and graduation, most students will never graduate. What will we do with them? We're in the midst of a vast social experiment on the children of this nation, and it's all tied to standardized testing. This is sheer madness. The standardized tests are just not that refined an instrument. They're imprecise. Sometimes they're wrong. When I was on the governing board of the federal test, I used to review the test questions in reading and in history and in civics. I never reviewed them in math because I couldn't get past 4th grade. Math is so hard today, I couldn't believe it. I want to give that test to a lot of the people like the governor. See if he scores NAEP proficient on the 8th grade test. I saw test questions, in reviewing these questions, saw test questions that had 2 right answers. I saw test questions that had no right answer. I saw test questions that were ambiguously worded, and they had been through review panel after review panel. There is a good reason that the testing companies want to keep the questions secret even after the exam. They don't want people to discover how many questions were nonsensical and how many answers were wrong. Do you know who scores the answers that are not multiple choice, the extended constructed response answers? The big testing companies hire anyone with a bachelor's degree from Craigslist to work for $11 an hour, scoring the responses as rapidly as possible. These are the temps who determine the future of the child and his or her teacher. There's a wonderful book by a guy named Todd Forley called Making the Grades, in which he describes his life as a test scorer. And the manager of his team had been a manager at Target. Putting so much weight on standardized tests has predictable results. It narrows the curriculum only to what is tested. In schools across the country, the arts have been cut back. In some places, they've been eliminated. Time for recess and physical education has been cut. Other subjects have suffered as more time and more money goes for test prep and testing. Tests are a measure, they are not instruction. Tests do not teach, teachers teach. Tests do not raise achievement. If you have a high fever and you take your temperature every 10 minutes, it will not lower your temperature. If you want to gain or lose weight, it will not help if you weigh yourself more frequently. You must do something else, like change your diet and exercise more. The Common Core tests are not like the tests that we all took in school when we were children. Parents don't understand this. They say, what's the big deal? We all took tests. In New York and in other states, children are spending anywhere from 8 to 11 hours on testing and even more hours on test prep. Why should children in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade sit for 8 hours of testing? They might as well take the bar exam. Why does it take so many hours to find out whether children can read or do math? When you were a child, did you take standardized tests that lasted 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 hours? Never. Well, parents need to understand this. This is different. When tests are made the arbiter of the fate of children and teachers and principals in schools, people find ways to game the system. Teachers teach to the test, which used to be considered unprofessional, but is now considered customary and necessary. In some districts like Atlanta and Washington, D.C., educators cheated, erased answers, corrected errors to get those sacred test scores up. And there is, of course, a role for testing in education, but it should be solely to diagnose a child's strengths and weaknesses so they can get additional help if they need it. Unfortunately, the Common Core tests have no diagnostic value. The tests are given in the spring. The scores are reported in August when the students have a different teacher. In some states, the scores will be reported even later than August, sometimes a year later. The teacher is not allowed to know how students answer the questions, so the teacher cannot tell what the student got wrong. The tests are used to grade the student, evaluate the teacher, and grade the school. They have no diagnostic value, which means they have no value at all. Now, imagine if you went to a doctor and said you were really feeling terrible, you had an awful pain, and the doctor gave you a series of tests, and he said, I'm sorry, but you won't get the results of the test for at least 4 to 6 months. And in 4 to 6 months, all you'll get is a score comparing you to other patients with the same symptoms across the state. Do you really care how your symptoms compare to somebody in Idaho, in California, in Maine? No, you want to get an answer and get help now, not 6 months from now. You may be dead in 6 months. So you'll find out how you compare to others across the state who have similar symptoms, but you'll get no instructions about what medicine to take or what to do differently. This would be as useless as the scores on the Common Core test. As a grandmother, I can tell you I have no interest in how my grandson compares to others of his age who live in Oregon or Alabama. Why should I, and why should his parents? Who cares? You're interested in your child and his well-being, and not is he as tall as short as, his scores as, come on. But there's another aspect to the focus on high-stakes testing that should concern you. Testing has seeped down to kindergarten. In some places, preschoolers are taking standardized tests. After all, children in kindergarten have to be tested to see if they're ready for first grade. Children in first grade must be tested to see if they're ready for second grade, and children in second grade must be tested to see if they're ready for third grade. Bear in mind that many young children have no keyboard skills and don't even know how to hold a pencil. But there's also this. Children and young people spend 13 years being taught to take multiple choice tests. They're learning that there is always a right answer to every question, but life doesn't consist of right answers. As Karen McGee said, life requires critical thinking. It requires the ability to see a problem from different perspectives. It requires the ability to see beyond the obvious, to listen to other people's ideas, and to ask better questions, not just to find the right answer. Most of life's answers are complex and not simple. When we place so much emphasis on the right answer, we penalize children who think differently. We crush individuality and creativity. I recommend to you Yang Zhao's wonderful book, which is called Who is Afraid of the Big Bad Dragon? Why China Has the Best and the Worst School System in the World. It is the best because it gets the highest scores, and it is the worst because it gets the highest scores, which create a test-driven culture that rewards conformity and not creativity. The United States became the greatest, most creative, most dynamic economy and culture in the world because of our diversity, because there were many different paths to success, not because of our conformity, not because of tests. Some children do poorly on the test but grow up to become successful artists or musicians or athletes or masters of technology. I recall Mrs. Obama saying a few years ago that if she had been judged by her test scores alone, she would never have been admitted to Princeton. Why do reformers want so many children to fail, and why do they want to fire teachers? In my opinion, they want public schools to look bad so they can replace them with privately managed charters. I have actually found quotes from reformers like Jeb Bush and Joel Klein saying precisely that. They want to panic parents, so they demand charters and vouchers and send their children to private and religious schools with public money. What should we be doing instead of relying so heavily on standardized tests? In successful schools, of which there are many in Westchester, we should let principals and teachers do their work without interference from the governor or the legislature. In schools that are struggling, the state should open pre-kindergarten programs with highly qualified teachers, reduce class sizes, make sure the schools have a rich program in the arts as well as psychologists, librarians, guidance counselors, social workers. Where help and extra resources are needed, they should be available. But how can we pay for it? How about taking the millions now spent on testing and test-based teacher evaluation and reallocate it directly to the schools? The simple answer is target the problem, target the resources to solve the problem. Don't punish everyone with the same remedy, which is inappropriate. Our public schools are a cornerstone of our democracy. They reflect the values of parents and communities. They reflect our aspirations for the future. They are not a political football. Albany should not tell superintendents, principals, and teachers how to do their jobs. They don't know how. The governor is not an educational expert. So to parents and educators and community leaders, I say, organize, mobilize, defend your children and your schools against the political attacks. Refuse the test. Now, I understand that if you do it alone, you're going to get hammered. If your school does it alone, the school may be hammered. If everyone does it, nobody gets hammered. As the union movement has always proved, in unity there is strength. You can't do anything alone. Don't allow your children to take the test. Opt out. That is the best, most effective way to send a message. It is the only means that you have to express your opposition to what the governor and the legislature and Arne Duncan and the Congress are doing. Congress is now debating how to reauthorize No Child Left Behind, and they're going to keep the annual testing because they think that's what you want. You have got to send them a message. In an ideal world, we would demand that these officials take the test and publish their scores. Let's see how many step up to the plate. But since we can't do that, we can at least withhold consent by saying, no, we will not do this. Václav Havel, the great Czech resistance leader, wrote about what he called the power of the powerless. That power resides in refusing to collaborate with those who impose harmful policies on us and on our children. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." There comes a time when civil disobedience is the appropriate and the moral response to a government that acts imperiously without regard for its citizens. That time is now. We must preserve and protect our public schools against those who would tear them down and privatize them. We must preserve public education for future generations. That is the civil rights issue of our time. Thank you.
Wow. The civil rights issue of our time. So that's a call to action. So I'd like to just welcome some people who I think we appreciate that they're here to support education. Regent Harry Phillips. Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Assemblyman David Buchwald. Senator Ruth Hassel Thompson. And Senator George Latimer. At this time, I'd like to invite the panel to come up. We're going to have the opportunity to hear more about testing and funding from local stakeholders.
My name is Robin Willig. I'm a 5th grade teacher in the Blybrook School District. Thank you. And I'm president of the Blybrook Ride Federation of Teachers.
Good evening. My name is Sal Fernandez. I'm the newly appointed member of the Board of Education in New Rochelle.
I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not. No. I'm Lou Wool, superintendent from Harrison.
I'm Lisa Eggert-Litvin. I'm the co-president of the Hastings-on-Hudson PTA, and I'm also the co-chair of the New York Suburban Consortium for Public Education.
So the first question I'd like to pose to the panel is, what do you see as the purpose of standardized testing in a public school setting? In what ways do our current state assessments serve that purpose? And in what ways do they miss the mark?
As a teacher, I can't say 100% sure that I'm sure what the purpose of the standardized tests are. There are administrators out here who evaluate me, evaluate us as teachers. There are parents here that entrust us with the education of their children. You have the right to think that every test, every assessment, every moment in that class has some meaning. And that when I give an assessment, it's going to inform your child's education, that it's going to help me get to know your child. Dr. Ravitch said it beautifully. It does miss the mark. I can't do that with these tests.
I think there can be a role for standardized testing if it's done properly. What we have now with the grades 3 through 8 tests is not proper. A standardized test should not have high-stakes consequences. They should be valid tests that truly test what they set out to. They should give significant information back to the teacher and the student, more than just a 1, 2, 3, or 4. In that way, a standardized test can guide instruction, and there's no pressure to teach to the test, there's no pressure to narrow curriculum. But in this way, we can learn where students are strong and weak and where our schools are strong and weak. That's what I'd like to see.
I will agree with the fact that the test is one indicator of many, and you really cannot measure the quality of the teaching that goes on every day. I believe that teachers, that teacher lesson, the curriculum that the teachers tailor to meet the needs of the students that they are working with, and that formative assessment that they do throughout the year is very valid. But I also believe that the standardized test plays a role. It just gives us a baseline, but we don't get it in a timely fashion so we could use it to do something good with it. So I believe that we should look at the way that it's being administered now, but I believe it just gives us an understanding, a baseline, and we should not say that we are not going to have that test. That's another measure of many. But it shouldn't count for teacher evaluation, and it shouldn't count, it just should count just as another way of seeing our children.
Well, I'm happy that we focused first on the value of the test, and I think your comments about the The particular tests that New York State developed were developed in the worst possible way. Curriculum wasn't in place, the tests were developed in a vacuum, and nobody actually knew whether those were psychometrically valid or not. So I'm not going to say that I'm opposed to testing. I think the way in which we're using testing, whether it's to evaluate teachers or kids, is really the problem. And we're starting to mix all of these issues, and my fear for us is that we're going to fall into the trap that the governor has laid, which is to say all of the things that we're opposed to, as opposed to laying out what we want. So I'm not going to fall into that trap tonight, because I think in my world, if I were trying to evaluate teachers, and I want to just mention that I was a teacher for 18 years before I got a demotion to superintendent of schools. One of the dumbest things I ever said in the interview is, this is the only profession where you start at the top and you work your way down. But here's what the research says, and I think that we do ourselves a disservice by not really knowing the research. Sometimes we argue against what is really best practice. So let's not respond to 50% or 40% because the New York State model is garbage. We all understand that it's garbage. However, I will tell you, and I had a very tough local president, Karen McGee, who was actually my we negotiated back when she was just the vice president of the Teachers Association, a very rigorous teacher evaluation system that we thought was research-based and valid. But the difference was, when we created it, we spent 5 or 6 years refining it, because we understood that when you're doing a model that is complex as trying to catch and capture whether or not you're an effective teacher is a complex thing. So if I were going to dream my dream, I would start over, and I wouldn't have one test. I would have lots of tests, and they would never be used in a moment in time. They would be used over time, because we can't adjust ever for all of the variables that you deal with. And here's the other big lie. In Harrison, when we negotiated our teacher evaluation system, we used to do 5 classroom observations on probationary teachers, and then the more rigorous standard of 4 came in. Thank you, Mr. Governor. But the truth of the matter is that the greatest invalidity in the evaluation system is in the classroom observation part. Not because we don't do it well, but because we don't do enough. In order to capture what you do, even if I were perfect at implementing that model, even if we brought in fabulous outside evaluators from Mars to validate what we were doing, at the end of the day, I need a really broad sample to capture what you do. So I think it's time that we reclaim the dialogue and say that, first of all, I believe teachers should be evaluated. I think you should be held accountable. I think we should have multiple measures, local growth measures, achievement measures, over time, that we look at in the aggregate and we make an intelligent, informed decision over a body of evidence as to whether or not you're effective. Because where we have lost the battle is somehow people have turned it into, we don't want to be held accountable. I beg you, don't fall into that trap.
What explanation can we give parents as to why their children should take state assessments, and what are the implications of students refusing the tests?
I've struggled with this because I'm not sure what to tell parents who say, why should I take the test? Because I can't give an honest answer to say there's a good reason to take them. They're not helping teach your children. Some people will say, well, you get experience taking tests, and that's what you're going to have to do throughout your academic career. But I don't know that there's a value to taking a test that is not a good test. The other possibility of why you should take it is the chance of harm coming to your school. That said, we've seen a refusal movement in Long Island that's been going on for 3 years now. Thank you, Long Island. And those schools, repeatedly, the past 3 years, are getting letters from the state saying that they are in good standing. So as of yet, everything's been okay. The implications of refusing, I just want to give you a little background about myself. I did not come right away to the refusal movement. I'm somebody who believes in working with the people in authority and coming up with something that we can all work with. So in my role as co-president of the PTA and in my role as co-chair of our consortium, We have exhausted every avenue. We have run viral email campaigns. We have met with people from the governor's office. We've spoken with people at the state education department. We've written letters to the editor. We've had op-eds published. We've attended rallies. We've had petitions. And we get nothing, and we get no response. So I have come to the point now where I think the only thing that is going to make a difference at this point is a massive refusal movement. But this is very important. I just want to pick up on what Dr. Ravitch said. In Long Island, the refusal movement is a well-oiled machine. In Westchester, it's not. In Rockland, it's not. In Putnam, it's not. And you can't have an isolated district here and there refusing. We need to make these county-wide, especially Westchester. Because of the wealth of Westchester, I think Albany will listen more because of the political donations that are made from here. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors and neighboring school districts that we need everyone on board to make a difference. And I think this is our last chance.
Talking about accountability, Dr. Wall, I couldn't agree with you more. We became teachers because we love learning and because we want to help children to become great learners. What kind of professionals do we want to create in the future? We want to create those critical thinkers, those artists, those people that can think outside the box, the ones that can crack the code, the ones that can code, the ones that can create the buildings and can figure out how to maintain them. I don't want to go to an engineer and just hear, well, I was a good test taker. I want to see the product. I want to see children who could take ownership of their learning. And I can assure you, parents, that at the end of the year, whether or not your child takes that standardized test, I will know your child. And so will the teachers that are advocates for them right here. I will know who likes to draw their answers. I will know who's good at multiple choice and who's good at short answer. I will know who will advocate for themselves, who asks great questions. Forget the answers for a moment. How about those great questions that tell you what a child knows? And who has the intelligence to have a sense of humor? Who will advocate not just for themselves, but for others? This is the future. This is career ready. Our tests do not value that or measure that. So don't worry, we will make sure that your children and we are accountable.
Well, you can start booing now, so boo. And the reason that I'm saying that is I've been a principal, been in the Department of Education in New York City for 34 years. I retire in September. I was the principal for 20 years in the middle school in very tough districts. District 5, Harlem, District 6, Washington Heights, District 7, South Bronx. And in those districts, it was hard to get teachers to work there, you know, in schools. And in my last school, I was there for 8 years, and the reason that I moved is I started in District 6 in Washington Heights, and I thought I was the best principal in the world, and I wanted to tackle the struggling schools in the city of New York, and I went to the South Bronx. And my first day there, I had a rude awakening, you know? And I said, well, I'm not the best principal, and I started learning from different cultures and different neighborhoods. And when I went back to Washington Heights to finish my career, I took on a school that was almost an impact school by label of the state, a lot of incidents. We provided safe environments for teachers to teach in. But one thing that I found was that I needed to have teachers meet. And I provided teachers to meet for 180 minutes a week. I built a program. I had to be very creative. And it didn't matter what tests the kids were taking because we were in test prepping. We were actually preparing our teachers to teach students well and really meet the needs. I'm a little nervous, don't worry. 62% of our kids were English language learners. So we had that, and out of those, 20% were special needs children. So, you know, we had all the excuses. Parents were not involved, this was that. But I told my teachers, why don't we teach? Forget about the test, forget about everything that's coming. Common Core came, we thought it was great. You know, we were going to teach our kids critical thinking. We were going to be able to cite textual evidence. We were doing this. And I said to my teachers, I'll protect you from all the voices out there. Let's focus on us getting to know what to do with these standards, how we teach kids. I had 5 periods a week, my kids had arts. And the kids that didn't have arts, they had 3 periods a week of STEM. Because not everybody is artistically inclined. I wasn't going to deny, I was going to educate the whole child. To say, I had 98% of my children tested every year. Year 1, when the test changed from whatever we had to the Common Core somewhat test, we took a dip. Okay, the next year we went up. And I said to my teachers, don't worry, the test is one measure, and all my teachers were highly effective or effective when the new measures came out. So again, it's not the test, it's not opting out of the test. We need to opt in and show that our kids can master that test no matter what avenue, okay? Well, I agreed.
So a couple things to talk about. So we're good at certain things, all of us. Most of you are very dedicated teachers and you spend all of your life trying to get better at your craft, and if you're lucky enough to be in a district that has resources, you probably get great PD, and that's a very important part of who we are. It's also an important part for all of us to acknowledge what we don't know. And I'm going to tell you, having spent the last 3 to 5 years trying really, really hard to understand the psychometric validity of a teacher evaluation system, I'm going to tell you right now that I don't have that expertise. Having said that, some people actually do. And what is absent in the debate, the anger that you feel, is that you're being assessed and your kids are being measured in ways that we know intuitively don't make sense. So if you want to waste a year of your life, no, an hour and a half of your life, you can go on to LOHUD. Back in this, I think the deep of summer, Dr. Myers and I from Valhalla were interviewed about a study that we did that had a very large sample of kids from Westchester and teachers from Westchester, which showed unequivocally that the current teacher evaluation model doesn't work at all. However, having said that, that doesn't mean that by opting out we've solved any problem. Opting out is part 1. Part 2 is, what does it mean and how do we develop a teacher evaluation system that measures the things that we value in a way that is defensible? And what we called for then, and what I'm calling for tonight, and I think the governor should take us up on this proposal, is let's put together not a NYSUT committee, not a superintendent committee, but a panel of unassailable experts in psychometrics and teacher evaluation, which we didn't do the first time. John King once drove by a public school. I would like to put a panel of folks together who actually could develop a coherent way of evaluating teachers, and we need not fight that. We need to be in favor of that. We need not fight testing, we need to fight bad testing. And if we continue to say the wrong message, we're going to get spun exactly where we have been spun, that public school is trying to avoid accountability. This superintendent and most teachers welcome accountability if it's carefully constructed. And let's acknowledge out loud that we might be expert at teaching, doesn't make us expert at psychometrics, and it takes the best minds in the world to capture what you do. So that's my challenge to this state. Let's do it right. Let's do it again.
We need a panel to create a new evaluation plan. And I want to just change the language a little bit, because we talk about, should student performance be part of a teacher's evaluation? What our government has used as student performance are these standardized tests. I think we need to change the language and say, we want student performance to be included. We want you to come into our classrooms and see the work that is created in our classrooms, see what's on the walls, read the writing that my children do. Have your department heads review the tests that are given, created by the teacher. Then use those test scores on the teacher-created tests. So we need to change that dialogue on what is student performance that should be used to measure a teacher's value.
Thank you. So we're going to switch gears, and we're going to talk about state aid. So how has the
I'm
government...
in favor of it.
We need money. How has the governor's decision to withhold state aid runs affect your district's ability to plan a local school district budget?
I'd like to go first because I am so fortunate to be in a community that is a high-resource district. So this year, our CAP formula will allow me to grow my budget 2.8%, 0.28%, or $270,000. I got problems. However, my problems are nothing compared to where I spent the first 18 years of my life, and that is in the Mount Vernon City School District, which is quite different. And I would argue that the peril to public education is most felt in those urban centers. And for state ed for the governor to link state aid to any kind of reforms is actually unconscionable and puts children in danger. Having said that, in every pile of poop hides a puppy. So, what I would like, that's exactly right, we're eternal optimists, aren't we? What I believe is possible is that if we maintain a tight focus on what's important, there are things in the governor's reform opportunity agenda that if they were recast, could be sensible. What we have to help him see as quickly as possible is that there are meaningful ways to get to accountability, like a task force. There are meaningful ways to audit whether or not a school district is effectively implementing its evaluation system. There are some folks who would perhaps put forward, like this superintendent, that a 5-year probationary period in my district would have saved a lot of teachers. Because for me, we have a very high standard, and I sometimes cut young people loose at the end of 2 years because I can't be sure and I don't want to kill their careers. I would love more time to develop them. So what we need to find is the sweet spot of what is it that we believe we can sell that speaks to those things that no one can argue against. There's nobody. Teachers Union is completely on board with meaningful accountability. Is there a teacher in the room that does not want to get rid of ineffective teachers? I've never met one. Oh, let's keep the bad ones. We can fix this. But unless we reclaim the narrative, the state aid is going to be linked to a set of ideas that's going to be absolutely interpreted in ways that are damaging to kids. It's the same thing that happened with the teacher's evaluation system. They never asked the people who actually do the work. So we're here and the phone is open.
I attended a Board of Ed meeting last night where my superintendent presented the proposed budget for next year, and he had to assume that we were getting no increase in state aid because we don't have the numbers. We've talked a lot about how this impacts the school. I just want to speak for a minute about the taxpayer, because when I speak at PTA meetings and I bring up the role of our taxes in schools, I find I get a lot of people listening on that. So withholding the runs means that taxpayers don't really know what their taxes are going to be. And that's, especially for people who are really struggling, that's not okay. And if you'll let me, I just want to go off on a tangent about taxpayers and underfunding. As you all know, our schools have been underfunded for the past 5 years. We haven't gotten the GEA money we're supposed to get, and we haven't gotten all the foundation aid. I looked at a lot of districts and at a lot of numbers. For many, many, many school districts, had they gotten their full funding, they would not have needed any tax increases. So what does this mean in terms of real dollars to taxpayers? Well, I ran the numbers for Dobbs Ferry, my neighboring town. And again, the assumption is, had we had full funding, your school taxes would not have gone up in the past 5 years. So a taxpayer who lives in Dobbs Ferry, who paid $10,000 in school taxes 5 years ago, has now spent an extra $4,000 to make up for the state's shortfall. If you paid more than $10,000, then you're out more than $4,000. And that has to stop. We are already probably the highest tax, or one of the highest tax counties in the nation, and our state's underfunding is just exacerbating that.
I agree with both of the statements that were made. As a newly appointed board member last year, July, I thought this budget season was going to be a breeze until our man there decided to become a bully and said he wasn't releasing the runs. So right now we're in the budget season. We have a lot of forums, we have a lot of meetings, and all we could do is guesstimate what we're getting from the state. And I agree with you, that's going to affect the taxpayers. And I hope that the politicians that are here today, or the elected officials that are here today, please go back to Albany and let's put a little pressure on the governor, because we really need to know what is it that we're getting, and in order for us to plan our budget effectively, because it's going to affect our children at the end. So.
And that's the only thing I would piggyback on, that I think the legislators, thank you very much for coming here today, really need to keep in mind that we're all here for the children. And I don't know if the governor has kept them in mind. So please, think about them.
Okay, so this is our last question for the evening, and it's really just asking you to comment. Please discuss the social, emotional impact that testing for sometimes up to 15 hours might have on a student with special accommodations, such as double time due to an IEP, or because a student is designated as an English language learner.
I think every single one of us in this room has experienced the test anxiety at some time or another. Well, just imagine a young child who is already struggling to sit still for 30 minutes, who is being put in a situation where they have to sit for hours and they have to do something that they don't feel successful at. Well, let's just say that same child, speed forward a few years, is now completely demoralized, does not think they're ever going to be good learners. And how about that ESL child? How about that child who's just come to this country, who may be considered very smart from where they came from, but now we're telling them they're dumb and they don't understand the culture. And when they're reading in these state tests about Title IX or the Civil War, they don't know enough to make the inferences, much less understand the subtleties of the language. It's cruel. It's hard to look at these children. It's hard when I have to take a test away from a child and say, I'm sorry, time is up. It's not right. And as parents, you have every right to expect me as a teacher to stand up for your child, which is why I'm here tonight, which is why all these teachers are here tonight. We have the responsibility to these children for best practices, for fair accountability. And you know something? We are trained to be experts in assessment. This is part of what we do in the classroom. We don't need the state test to come in and tell us how to evaluate our learning goals. We have those skills already. Let us use them. Let us use the assessments that we use regularly to inform the instruction.
You know, you used the word cruel. And that's the word that I hear as well from parents whose children are in this situation. It's cruel and it has to end. Regent Harry Phillips, who I was so pleased attended tonight, has really been a tireless advocate on this point. And the point that he makes is that currently there are alternate assessments only for a very small sliver of the population of children with special needs. And he has advocated that children who cannot perform because of their disabilities, they cannot perform at their chronological age, should be allowed to take a different assessment. As a PTA, we picked up on Regent Phillips' proposal. We wrote to Secretary Duncan and to President Obama asking for this, and we were denied. It has to change.
3 days is too long. That's cruel. 3 days for ELA, 3 days for math, that's 6 days. We're losing instruction. So I believe that the test should be shortened. We don't need 3 days to evaluate. We are evaluating throughout the year. Teachers are evaluating throughout the year. But we do have to have some type of test that will measure at the end to culminate the year or in between. But 3 days, it really disrupts the instruction of our schools. I just want to add a little bit about the ELS. To test English language learners a year and a day that they've been in this country is also cruel. It says loud and clear, research says loud and clear that in order to master or acquire a language, it takes 5 to 7 years. So how can we test a child after a year and a day in this country? That's not right. So that's a federal piece that we need to deal with. And a lot of this all came out also of the No Child Left Behind law. So again, that's all I have to say about this piece.
I think we should test all 8-year-olds for 7 or 8 hours now. So I remember standing outside my high school gym. I'm an East Chester High School graduate, about to take the English Regents, and I was really nervous. I did really well. I got a 99, it's the highest score I ever got in Regents. But the kid next to me came in, I think he had been to Colorado, his eyes were kind of blurry. And I said, "Aren't you worried?" He goes, "You worry, you die. You don't worry, you die." That won't fix the problem. But I think sometimes we dream too small. So some kids might benefit from a test over multiple days or a longer period of time with breaks in between, but that would require that we trusted that our teachers weren't cheating, right? Because one of the real things is that we think that everybody can finish an assessment in the same time. And what if a kid can actually successfully finish that assessment, but over time? Is that a bad thing? Well, the most important thing is whether or not we can determine whether or not the child can be successful. And when we accept the limitations that we can assess all children in the same way, we buy into the notion that somehow this measure, in the way that it's administered, tells you what you need to know. So I think that's problem number one. But problem number two is, we talk about the Common Core standards. My school district is predicated on the idea of multiple intelligences, right? And it's predicated on 4 concepts: equity, adaptability, rigor, and access. None of the things that we're talking about tonight speak to how we ensure equity of opportunity and access if your entry point and who you are is determined by a test score, because the common decency standards have been left out of the Common Core standards. So I would argue that you're still dreaming too small. When we talk about rebuilding the system, assessment isn't what we've defined it as. It isn't tests that we give at a moment in time. It's a series of things that we collect that demonstrate human growth as well as academic growth. So that might take more than a few minutes.
So I'd like to provide our panelists with an opportunity to make any final comments.
Regardless of what is going to be decided in the legislature, the budget, this is a long-term commitment that each and every one of us make here to do what's best to educate children. So let's not make it just about the test, just about the funding. Let's just continue to do what we know is right and to stand up for the children that right here can't stand up for themselves.
I just want to say that thank you very much. Teachers, you are the most important people in the school. You meet our children every day for 6 hours, 8 hours a day. You give them the extra support they need. I thank you very much for the work you do. I'm an educator for life, and I'm a lifelong learner. So I learn every single day, and I enjoy it. I'm working now with struggling schools, and I see those kids' eyes when we're providing the extra support in the city, and they're lit up, they're happy. Teachers are working together collaboratively, and we're not even talking about the test. We're just saying we need to provide you with the social, emotional support. And if you give that to the children, and you could go home every night and be happy, just keep doing it. You're the best. That's all I can say.
Thank you for allowing me to be here and for the invitation. I would like to remind you that for me, the most important part of tonight is do not let the critics narrow the conversation. You fail yourselves and you fail your children if you allow this to develop into sound bites, because that's what the enemy has done. We have to advance a knowledgeable, carefully constructed argument that talks about what we value for kids. And we have to acknowledge what we don't know, and we have to acknowledge who we need to bring in so that we can fix the system. I'm not going to participate in something as simple as name calling, because in the end, I don't want to be that person. I think we have to aspire to something greater than that. And that is, let's provide an alternative narrative, an accurate narrative, to the one that's been perpetuated by folks in power.
And just to follow up on what you said, part of changing that narrative is changing the narrative that's been created about teachers. I know it's an easy audience to say this in front of, but those of you from my district know that to my core that we need to value our teachers. I think Jon Stewart said something along the lines of basically all problems in America come down to the middle school science teacher. I think we need to show them that teachers in impoverished districts, in wealthy districts, have so much talent and devotion, and you should deserve our thanks and nothing more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. You all were great.